The station smelled like recycled air and something faintly metallic. And Mara Voss had noticed it on her very first day at Veyrak Interstellar Academy. 3 weeks later, she still caught it every single morning when she walked the wide main corridor toward the cafeteria, with her food tray balanced flat in one hand and her datapad tucked under her opposite arm. She was not a particularly tall girl. Most people who saw her for the first time assumed she was younger than 19. She had dark brown hair she kept tied back from her face, yet quiet eyes that moved slowly around every new room she entered, and a way of walking that was even and unhurried, like someone who had learned a long time ago that running was only for emergencies. Veyrak Interstellar Academy sat in orbit, above a neutral star system at the edge of the galactic community's inner territories. It was one of the few places in known space where students from dozens of different species studied side by side under the same roof, or at least the closest architectural equivalent of a roof that could satisfy 400 different atmospheric preferences. The station was enormous, all long corridors and wide observation decks and lecture halls built at different heights and angles to accommodate different body types. To a human eye, it looked like someone had designed a building while standing sideways, but Mara had gotten used to it. The cafeteria was the most crowded part of the station at mealtimes. It had been designed to handle the widest possible range of dietary needs, which meant that on any given morning you might sit next to someone eating raw mineral paste, someone absorbing light through a membrane on their back, and then someone consuming something that was still technically moving. Mara had encountered all three in her first week and had adjusted her seat slightly on each occasion but had not otherwise reacted, which had quietly impressed at least two of the three. She took her usual place at the small two-seat table near the far wall, slightly apart from the main clusters of students. She liked this spot because she could see the whole cafeteria from here, on every entrance and every table and every face. On Earth, that kind of constant awareness had not been a choice so much as a basic requirement, and she had not unlearned it just because she was now 40 light years from home. She was halfway through her second plate when Quiv arrived. Quiv was a Thessian, which meant he was roughly the same height as Mara, but considerably thinner, yet with large dark eyes and translucent skin that shifted color depending on his emotional state. When he was calm, it held a faint blue-white tone, and when he was nervous or embarrassed, it flushed a soft violet. He was nervous fairly often. He carried 3 datapads everywhere he went, apologized for things that were entirely not his fault, and had a deep and genuine curiosity about Earth that he expressed through very earnest questions at mealtimes. "You are on your second plate again," he said, sitting down and spreading his datapads across the table in careful order. "Third, if the training room is open after this," Mara told him without looking up. Quiv looked at her food, then at her, with the particular expression he wore when he was trying to calculate something and the numbers were refusing to cooperate. "Your caloric consumption is statistically very unusual for your body mass," he said. "We burn a lot," Mara said simply. This was, in fact, a significant understatement. The medical intake system on the station had flagged Mara's dietary records as a probable data error on her second day, and it had taken a human biology reference file and 2 confused faculty members to confirm that no, the numbers were correct, and yes, this was simply what humans required. Her bone density had also triggered a second reading, and her cardiovascular recovery data had been quietly forwarded to the xenobiology department, where it was still sitting in a review queue that no one had quite gotten around to addressing yet. Mara was not thinking about any of this. She was eating, and she was watching the room. Specifically, she was watching the far corner, where a group of Krekery students occupied 3 tables they had pushed together into one. Krekery averaged close to 2 meters in height, broad through the chest and very thick through the neck, and they organized every social situation according to a strict dominance hierarchy. The largest individual in any group was the automatic authority, and the others arranged themselves outward from that center in an unspoken but completely rigid ranking. It was a system that worked efficiently, Mara assumed, on a planet where being the biggest thing in the room was genuinely the most important quality a creature could have. The biggest Krekery at Veyrak was named Grethvon. Mara had learned this in her first week without ever speaking to him directly, and which was how she preferred to gather information about potential problems. Grethvon was currently standing beside a table of smaller students from the Veth colony system. They were a quiet, studious species that averaged around Mara's own height, and right now every single one of them was sitting completely still. One had dropped his eyes to his food tray. One had placed both hands flat on the table surface. And one was staring straight ahead, with the fixed expression of a creature that had decided the safest strategy was to become invisible. Greth Vaughn said something Mara could not hear across the distance. His companions laughed behind him. He reached out and knocked one of the Veth students' datapads cleanly off the edge of the table. And it cracked hard against the floor. Not one of the surrounding tables looked directly at what had happened. They all found something else to study very suddenly. Greth Vaughn walked away laughing. Beside Mara, Quiv had gone very still, in his skin a steady pale lavender. "He does that every few days," Quiv said quietly. "The administration knows about it. His family has a diplomatic arrangement with the station council. Every complaint that gets filed disappears within a day." "I know," Mara said. "Does it not make you angry?" Quiv asked. Mara set down her fork and thought about this honestly for a moment. The way she always did before answering something that deserved a real answer. "Yes," she said. "But you will not do anything," Quiv said. "Not right now," Mara said, and picked her fork back up. Quiv watched her. In Thessian's social understanding, patience in the face of open aggression was a form of surrender, a signal that you had accepted your position below the aggressor. But when Mara said those three words, there was nothing in her voice or her posture that resembled surrender at all. She was relaxed and unhurried and completely present. Her eyes moved once, briefly, to the door Greth Vaughn had passed through, noted it with the same calm attention she gave everything, and then came back to her food. Quiv did not have a word in his language for what he was looking at. He made a mental note to research human behavioral patterns more carefully when he returned to his room. The meal ended. Mara stacked her trays neatly, said goodbye to Quiv, and walked back toward her dormitory at her usual pace, steady, quiet, unhurried, taking in everything around her without making a visible show of it. The corridor biometric sensors, in which monitored all student health data as a standard station safety measure, recorded her heart rate as she walked, 56 beats per minute, perfectly level. The reading of someone completely at rest. She was not at rest. She was watching and thinking and waiting. And on the planet where she had grown up, the difference between those three things and actual rest had never mattered very much at all. The night Mara Voss turned 12 years old, a wolf pack followed her home through 3 kilometers of frozen Siberian forest. Not one wolf, not two, but 7 of them. And she did not run. Running from wolves in that kind of forest was how you died. Her father had explained this to her when she was 6 years old, crouching beside her in the snow outside their settlement and pointing at the dark tree line in the distance. "You run," he had said, "and you become prey. You stand your ground, and you might be a threat." Predators almost always chose the easiest available option, and almost everything that wanted to hurt you worked the same way. So at 12, in total darkness, with 7 wolves circling her at a distance of roughly 15 meters, Mara had walked, slowly and steadily. Saw without breaking her stride or changing her breathing. She had made herself take up as much space as she could without appearing to rush. She had watched all 7 of them the way her father taught her, not staring directly at any single one but keeping all of them inside her field of vision at the same time. And the wolves had followed her all the way to the edge of the settlement's perimeter lights and then stopped there at the boundary, watching her go inside. She had gone in, eaten dinner, and not mentioned it to anyone until years later. This was, in many ways, the most important thing to understand about Mara Voss. Not what she was capable of, but how she thought about what she was capable of. She did not consider herself exceptional. She considered herself prepared. Growing up in the Siberian-Ural corridor after the climate shift had made preparation the basic cost of survival, and her family had paid that cost without complaint for 3 generations running. Her mother was a structural engineer who had once climbed down into a collapsed tunnel with a hand torch and a rope to map the damage before anyone else would go in. Her father was a wilderness guide who had survived 2 avalanches, a bear encounter, and 1 winter alone in the mountains with nothing but what he could carry. They were not dramatic people. They did not talk often about the things they had survived. They simply prepared and acted, and then went home and ate dinner. Mara had grown up inside that same framework without ever being told to. It had simply absorbed into her the way cold and hunger and effort absorbed into you when they were just the regular texture of your days. By the time she was 16, she had taken a wilderness survival course, a basic field medicine course, and 3 years of systema training under an old instructor who worked out of a repurposed storage building near the settlement's eastern edge. Systema was not a flashy discipline. It did not look impressive in demonstrations, and it did not require a large body to practice effectively. It was built entirely on one principle, which the old instructor repeated at the start of every single session without variation. Stay soft, he would say, moving slowly around the edge of the mat. Tension is information. It tells whatever is touching you exactly where your weight is and where you're about to go. Stay soft, stay quiet, and hit harder than anything that has ever hit you. It had taken Mara 2 years to understand what he meant, and another year to actually do it. She thought about all of this on her 4th week at Veyrak Interstellar Academy while she walked to the training room in the early morning before most of the station was awake. The training room was a wide-open space on the station's lower deck that most students used for low-impact fitness and stretching. It was rarely occupied before the first morning bell, and Mara preferred it that way. She went through her routine alone in the empty room. It was not a dramatic routine to watch. There was no jumping or shouting or dramatic strikes against a bag. She moved slowly through position after position, very relaxed, arms loose at her sides, weight shifting from one foot to the other in patterns she had practiced so many thousands of times that her body ran through them without her having to think about them at all. She was near the end of her session when the door opened and 2 Crechery students walked in. Not Greth Vaughn, only 2 of his companions. They stopped when they saw her and exchanged a look that she recognized immediately. It was the look of creatures who had decided that what they were seeing was not something they needed to take seriously. "Human," one of them said. He was not speaking to her exactly. I'm more narrating her presence the way you might note an insect on a wall. Mara stopped her movement and looked at them. She did not say anything. "The small ones always use this room early," the other one said to his companion in Standard. They were speaking Standard deliberately, making sure she could hear and understand. "Before the real students arrive." Mara picked up her water bottle from the floor and took a drink. "The room is shared," she said, on her voice entirely even. "There is space for all of us," the first one laughed. She noted that he held his weight differently than Greth Vaughn did, less forward through the hips, which meant he was less rooted than he looked. She noted this the way she noted everything and filed it away without reacting to it. "Small, quiet, and polite," he said. "Very human." "Yes," Mara agreed, and went back to her routine. They stayed for several minutes, taking up space in the middle of the room and making more noise than necessary. Then they left, still laughing at something. Mara finished her session, stretched, drank the rest of her water, and walked to breakfast. She saw Greth Vaughn in the cafeteria that morning standing over Quiv's table. Quiv was frozen in his seat, skin a deep lavender now, almost purple, both hands in his lap. Greth Vaughn had one hand resting on the back of Quiv's chair, not touching him but close enough that the message was clear. Mara stood up from her table. She walked across the cafeteria at a normal pace, not hurrying, not changing her expression. She stopped about a meter from Greth Vaughn and said, "I think that is enough." Her voice was the same voice she used to answer questions in class. Level, clear, and completely unexcited. Greth Vaughn turned to look at her. He was nearly a full head taller than she was. Yisiani looked at her the way his 2 companions had looked at her in the training room, the way something large looks at something small that has made a noise. He studied her posture. She was not puffing herself up, not raising her hands, not spreading her feet into a fighting stance. By every physical signal in the Krikari social vocabulary, she was doing nothing aggressive at all. His face shifted into something that was very clearly amusement. "Go eat your food, human," he said, and he turned back to Quiv. Mara stood there for one more second. Then she turned and walked back to her table and sat down and went back to her meal. Across the cafeteria, a few students who had been watching let out long, quiet breaths. One Delori student stared at her with open confusion, because in his experience, walking toward a Krikari and then walking away was the action of someone who had just been very badly beaten in a social exchange. But Quiv, once Greth Vaughn and his group had left the cafeteria entirely, looked across at Mara with an expression she had not seen on him before. It was not quite confusion, and it was not quite fear. It was something closer to the beginning of understanding. Mara ate the rest of her breakfast without looking up. Her instructor's voice sat quietly in the back of her mind, the way it always did. "Stay soft," he had said. "Tension is information. Stay soft." I stay quiet. She had stayed very soft. She had also learned exactly what she needed to know. Dr. Savath had been teaching xenobiology at Veyrak Interstellar Academy for 19 years, and she had reviewed intake medical files for students from 61 different species. She thought she had a reasonable sense of what to expect from the physical profile of any given student before they even walked through her classroom door. She had not expected Mara Voss. The file had been sitting in her review queue for 4 weeks, flagged by the medical intake system with a low-priority yellow marker, which usually meant a minor anomaly, like an unusual blood composition or an atypical respiratory rate. She opened it during a quiet afternoon between lectures, settled back in her chair, and began reading. 17 minutes later, she was sitting forward. She read the bone density figures twice. They were not a data error. The station's medical scanner had rerun the measurement automatically after the first reading because the numbers seemed implausible, and the second measurement had matched the first exactly. Mara Voss's skeletal density was approximately 40% higher than the nearest comparable species in the galactic community's biological index, a classification that included several species that were considered physically formidable by interstellar standards. The cardiovascular data was, if anything, more striking. Not because the numbers were extreme in any single direction, but because of what they showed under stress. The medical system had recorded Mara's biometric readings across her first 4 weeks on the station, and the pattern was consistent and unusual. Her resting heart rate sat comfortably in the mid-50s, which was normal for a human, but in situations where other species' biometrics spiked sharply, her heart rate barely moved. There had been an incident in week 2 where a pressurization alarm had sounded on her dormitory deck, like the kind of alarm that routinely pushed student heart rates into the 140s and 150s. Mara's had reached 62, held there for 20 seconds, and returned to baseline before the alarm had even been silenced. Dr. Savath pulled up the General Earth Classification record and read through it carefully. Class 7. Deathworld, the only confirmed inhabited Class 7 in the galactic community's catalogued territories. Atmospheric oxygen levels high enough to be combustion risk. Gravity above galactic average. Surface temperature ranges that should have made complex life impractical. Predator density in wild zones classified as extreme. And a complete evolutionary history that essentially amounted to 4 billion years of everything on the planet trying very hard to kill everything else. She looked back at Mara's file. 17 healed fractures. The intake notes listed them calmly, as if they were unremarkable. 4 of them, annotated in small text by the medical droid, were marked as injuries that would have been fatal or permanently disabling in any other species currently enrolled at the Academy. Mara had apparently described all 17 to the intake droid as a few old injuries and had not elaborated further. Dr. Savath updated the file's classification tag. She changed it from yellow low priority to a new designation she had to create specifically for this occasion. She typed it carefully. Passive high threat entity. Category pending further. FAR review. Then she sat quietly for a moment and thought about the fact that this small, polite, softly spoken 19-year-old human had walked onto the station, chosen a quiet table near the back wall, and had apparently been sitting there for 4 weeks eating large meals and saying please and thank you to the cafeteria staff. She sent a quiet note to the head of student safety recommending that Mara Voss's file be reviewed at the next faculty meeting. She worded it carefully, because she was not sure how to explain what she was concerned about. She was not concerned that Mara was dangerous in a reckless sense. She was concerned about something harder to name, the specific quality of a creature that was very dangerous and also in complete control of that fact at all times. The note was read, acknowledged, and scheduled for discussion 3 weeks out. In the meantime, things on the station continued. Grethvaughn's behavior did not improve. If anything, the brief moment in the cafeteria where Mara had stepped between him and Quiv had, in his social framework, resolved in his favor. She had approached him, said a thing, and then walked away without incident, which by Krakari standards was a clear signal that she had assessed the situation and chosen submission. He had not thought about her much since then, and which was exactly how he treated everything he considered beneath his tier. His focus had shifted to a group of Delori students who shared a corridor with Quiv's dormitory block. The Delori were a gentle, community-focused species, physically similar in size to Thessians, and they had no cultural framework for responding to direct dominance-based aggression. They went quiet when confronted, which Greth Vaughn had identified as the ideal response, because it meant he could keep going without anything interrupting the pattern. Mara filed a formal complaint with the station administration on a Wednesday morning. She sat in the small office near the main hall, answered every question the intake coordinator asked her, described 5 specific incidents she had personally witnessed with dates and locations, and submitted the written report through the official system before lunch. The rejection notice arrived the same afternoon. It cited insufficient evidence of intentional harm, noted that the incidents described fell within the behavioral norms of the Krikari cultural framework as recognized by the station's interspecies conduct policy, and recommended that students who felt uncomfortable approach a student wellness counselor. Mara read the rejection notice all the way to the end. She folded it in half, then folded it again, and dropped it into the recycling slot by the door of her room. Quiv was sitting on the floor in the corridor outside her door when she came out. He had been waiting, which was unusual for him, because Thessians considered waiting outside someone's private space to be slightly rude. "What did they say?" he asked. "No," Mara said. "I expected that," Quiv said. His skin was pale and a little blue-white, which meant he was trying to be calm but not quite managing it. "What will you do?" "Nothing yet," Mara said. Quiv stood up slowly. "Mara," he said. Yesterday, he grabbed a Delori student by the shoulder and held him against the wall for nearly a full minute. The student could not speak afterward, and he was so frightened. "This is not something that gets better on its own." "I know," Mara said. "I am not saying it will get better on its own. I am saying I need him to do it where I am standing." Quiv looked at her. He had been trying for 4 weeks to fully understand Mara Voss, and he had made progress in some areas and almost none in others. But right now, he understood this part clearly enough. Owen and the understanding made the back of his neck feel cold. "How bad will it be?" Quiv asked. Mara thought about this honestly, the way she always thought about things she was asked directly. "For him," she said. "Or for me?" "For him," Quiv said. "He will be fine afterward," Mara said. "Probably." Quiv decided this was not as reassuring as she seemed to think it was. 3 days later, in the wide main corridor outside the Eastern lecture halls, Greth Vaughn found Quiv walking alone between classes. He had 2 of his companions with him, and he stepped directly into Quiv's path and stayed there. Other students in the corridor began to slow and then to stop, arranging themselves at the edges of the space the way crowds always arrange themselves around this kind of moment. Quiv froze. His species froze. It was involuntary. Or it was the same response Mara had recognized from the first week. His skin went almost completely white. Greth Vaughn reached out and took hold of the neck membrane at the back of Quiv's collar. It was a deeply violating gesture in Thessian culture. Saw the rough equivalent of grabbing a person by the throat. Quiv made a small sound and could not seem to make himself move. Mara was 10 meters away when it happened. She had been walking toward the lecture hall from the opposite end of the corridor. She saw it happen in the same moment that most of the corridor saw it happen, and the crowd around her pulled back slightly, on creating a clear line of open space between her and the scene ahead. She started walking toward them, not running, walking, at the same steady, even pace she used for everything. And the corridor biometric sensors captured her heart rate in that moment and recorded it faithfully, 54 beats per minute, going down, not up. The corridor had gone very quiet. Not the quiet of an empty space, but the specific quiet of a crowded space where every single creature has simultaneously decided to hold its breath. There were close to 30 students spread along the walls on both sides, and not one of them moved, not one of them stepped forward, and not one of them looked directly at what was happening in the center of the hall. Greth Vaughn had not released Quiv. He was holding the neck membrane loosely but deliberately, on the way something holds something else when it wants to make a point about being able to hold it. Quiv's skin had gone a flat, strange white that was not a color his species was supposed to turn, and his feet were barely touching the floor. Mara walked through the open corridor space toward them and stopped about 2 meters away. "Let him go," she said. Her voice was the same voice she used in class when she answered a question. Not loud, not soft, Not angry, just the basic sound of a person making a statement they expected to be heard. Greth Vaughn turned his head and looked at her. He recognized her from the cafeteria, the small human who had walked toward him and then walked away, which he had since categorized as exactly the kind of behavior he expected from lesser species who briefly forgot their place and then quickly remembered it. He saw her standing there now, 2 meters away, no aggressive posture, hands at her sides, face completely calm. And he read all of it as the same thing he had read it as before. Submission. He smiled. It was a wide, satisfied expression. You again, he said. The little earth creature, you want to do this again. He released Quiv with a small push that sent Quiv stumbling sideways into the wall. Go ahead, he said, spreading his arms wide, unperforming for the corridor crowd. Tell me again that it is enough. Mara did not tell him it was enough. She also did not step back. She stepped forward. Greth Vaughn moved toward her. He was a head taller and half again her body weight, and he moved with the casual confidence of something that had never once encountered a situation where its size had not been the deciding factor. He reached for her shoulder with his right hand. Anya Grab intended to pick her up and demonstrate to the corridor exactly how different their positions were. What happened in the next 4 seconds would be reviewed, paused, rewound. Ian reviewed again by station security and the faculty review board, a combined total of 37 times over the following week. Every person in that corridor watched it happen in real time and still did not fully process it until they saw the recording. His hand came toward her shoulder. She did not block it. She simply moved, just slightly, just enough. The way water moves around a stone. His hand found nothing but air, and his own momentum pulled him 2 centimeters forward and off his center of balance. It was an almost invisible shift. The kind of movement so small that if you blinked, you would miss it entirely. Her left hand came up and made contact with his elbow joint from below. Not a strike, a placement. Her palm pressed upward against the underside of the joint at the precise angle where the cartilage structure offered the least resistance, and the leverage ratio made her 40-kilogram body far more relevant than her 40 kilograms would otherwise suggest. It was not a dramatic movement. It did not look like something from a fighting demonstration. It looked almost like she was helping him with his balance. Greth Vaughn's arm bent. The direction arms were not designed to bend. He made a sound and went forward and down. Mara moved with him, not against him, turning his own momentum and the new angle of his body into a controlled spiral. Her right hand was at the back of his neck before he fully understood he was falling. A thumb positioned against the specific junction of the cervical vertebrae that her old instructor had shown her on a diagram when she was 15 years old, and had made her practice finding by touch in the dark so many times that she could locate it instantly without thought. She applied pressure, not maximum pressure, not braking pressure, but precise pressure, or the specific amount needed to cause immediate cervical subluxation without permanent damage. Greth Vaughn collapsed. He was conscious. She had made sure of that. His eyes were open and moving, and he was breathing. But his body was not responding to his instructions, and the expression on his face was one that no one in the corridor had ever seen on a Krikari before. Not anger, and not even pain. Something that had no name in most species' emotional vocabularies because most species never had occasion to feel it. Complete disbelief. Mara stepped back 1 step. She checked her own hands, both of them, briefly, a habit from her field medicine training. Then she turned and went to Quiv, who was pressed against the wall with his skin still that flat, abnormal white. She put her hand on his arm gently and said, "You are okay?" And her voice was the same as it had been at the beginning, level, clear, completely unexcited. The corridor was still absolutely silent. One of Greth Vaughn's companions had not moved from the spot where he had been standing since before it started. His mouth was slightly open. He said something in Krikari, very quietly, that the station's translation system picked up and filed in the incident report. It translated roughly as, "She did not tense her shoulders once, not once, from the beginning." Station security arrived 4 minutes later. Mara was sitting cross-legged on the floor near the wall, her back straight, waiting. Quiv was sitting beside her, his color very slowly returning toward blue-white. When the security officers approached, Mara stood up immediately and said, "I am ready to come with you," and went with them without being asked twice. The incident report was filed. The medical team that arrived for Grethvon confirmed cervical subluxation with no spinal cord damage. In no permanent injury, he would recover full movement within 2 weeks with proper treatment. The medical officer made a note in his report that the injury profile was consistent with someone who had known exactly what outcome they were creating and had aimed for it deliberately. The footage from the corridor cameras was reviewed by station security within the hour. A copy was flagged to the Krakari diplomatic liaison as a matter of standard interspecies incident protocol. The liaison, he watched the footage twice, sent it to Grethvon's family's legal team, and then did not contact the station administration again for 11 hours. When they did respond, they withdrew every complaint and every countercharge and requested a quiet settlement. The legal team's internal communications were not shared with the station, but the speed of the withdrawal said most of what needed to be said. The corridor cameras had also captured the full biometric feed from the station's passive health monitoring system. Security pulled Mara's heart rate data from the 2-minute window surrounding the incident. It had been 54 beats per minute when she started walking toward Grethvon. It had reached a peak of 59 beats per minute during the 4 seconds of the confrontation itself. It had returned to a 55 by the time she sat down against the wall to wait. One of the security officers, a Threen veteran who had worked on 3 different stations across a 20-year career, reviewed that biometric data 3 times. Then, he set it down and did not say anything for a while. Dr. Saveth received the incident alert on her personal communicator during dinner. She pulled up Mara's file, opened the pending classification tag she had created 3 weeks earlier, and deleted the word passive. She saved the file and went back to her meal. The review board convened 2 days after the incident and spent 3 hours and 14 minutes reviewing the corridor footage, the biometric data, the medical reports, the filed complaint that had been rejected, the withdrawn Krekari countercharges, and the testimony of 11 students who had been present in the corridor. The conclusion they reached was not a simple one. Every legal metric pointed in the same direction. Mara Voss had been standing in a public corridor. She had not initiated contact. She had verbally requested that the aggressor stop before physical contact occurred. She had not used maximum available force. She had not caused permanent injury. By the station's interspecies conduct code, by the galactic community's general self-defense statutes, and by 3 separate legal frameworks applied to the incident by 3 separate board members, she had done everything correctly. The board cleared her of all charges in a document that was 4 pages long and notably careful in its wording. What the document did not say, but what every member of the board was quietly thinking as they filed out of the review room, it was the thing they had all noticed when they watched the footage. She had not done everything correctly because she had gotten lucky or because the situation had resolved itself. She had done everything correctly because she had known, from the moment she walked into that corridor, exactly what she was doing and exactly how much it was going to take. And the gap between what she had used and what she could have used was a gap that none of them wanted to think about too directly. Mara received the clearance notice on her datapad while she was in the training room. She read it, set the datapad down on the floor beside her water bottle, and went back to her routine. That evening, Quiv came to her room. He had not been in class since the incident, and his color was still not entirely right. Drifting between pale blue and faint lavender in a slow, uncertain cycle. He sat down on the floor because Mara's room had only 1 chair and she had a stack of books on it. She sat across from him and did not ask him how he was feeling because she could see exactly how he was feeling. They were quiet for a while. "I want to ask you something," Quiv said finally. "Go ahead," Mara said. "In the corridor," Quiv said. "When you were walking toward him, before anything happened, your face was..." He paused, searching for a word that fit. "It was like you were going to do your laundry. It was like it was something ordinary." "It was ordinary," Mara said. Quiv looked at her. "How?" he said. Mara thought about this for a long time, long enough that Quiv started to think she was not going to answer. Then she said, "On Earth, if you panic, things go wrong. If you freeze, things go wrong. So somewhere a very long time ago, humans stopped doing those things. We stopped panicking. We kept the fear because fear tells you useful information, but we stopped letting it run the body. The body has to stay calm so it can do what it needs to do." Quiv was quiet. Your species evolved out of panic, he said. More or less, Mara said. That is, Quiv said, and stopped and started again. Yes, that is one of the most frightening things I have ever heard. It kept us alive, Mara said simply. Quiv sat with this for a moment. Are you all right? He asked. You, specifically. Are you all right? Mara looked at him. It was a question almost no one had thought to ask her in the past 2 days. See, and the fact that it was Quiv who asked it did not surprise her. Yes, she said. I am... She paused. Are you? Not entirely, Quiv said honestly. But I will be... They sat in her small room for another hour, talking about other things. Quiv's research, Mara's upcoming practical examination, the cafeteria's new addition to the nutrient menu that both of them had tried and found disappointing. And by the time Quiv left, his color had steadied to a clear and even blue-white, which was the closest he got to fully relaxed. In the weeks that followed the incident, something changed on Veyrak Interstellar Academy. It changed quietly, the way most meaningful things changed without announcement or ceremony. The students from the dormitory block that Greth Vaughn had used as his primary territory began showing up at Mara's cafeteria table. Not all at once, not in a group that made a statement. 1 or 2 at a time, on different days, sitting nearby and opening their datapads and studying. Some of them had never spoken to her before and still didn't. Not right away. They just existed near her. And the way small animals in a forest exist near something large and calm that has demonstrated it is not a threat to them, but very definitely is a threat to other things. Mara did not invite them and did not turn them away. She passed bread to whoever was sitting closest without being asked and kept her eyes on her own work. Greth Vaughn's social group, what remained of it, navigated the cafeteria differently now. They took a different route to their usual tables, and the route happened to bypass Mara's section of the room entirely. No one commented on this change. It had not been discussed. It had simply happened. The way all real decisions about territory happened, are through behavior rather than words. Word had moved through the Krikari student network within 48 hours of the incident. Station communications were difficult to keep quiet, and Krikari social networks were efficient. The phrase that circulated had been said first by the student who had been standing in the corridor. You were the one who had spoken quietly in his own language while Greth Vaughn was still on the floor. It translated several different ways depending on the dialect, but the consistent version that spread went, the small human. Don't. She does not get loud. She gets quiet. By the time it had circulated fully, even the most confident Krikari students at Veyrak had received and processed it. None of them tested it. Greth Vaughn himself left Veyrak Academy at the end of that week. His family issued a statement through the diplomatic liaison citing personal and health reasons. He did not say goodbye to anyone, and no one organized a farewell. The tables he had pushed together in the cafeteria corner were separated back to their original arrangement by the cleaning staff and claimed by a group of Veth. The students the following morning. 3 weeks after the incident, on a regular Thursday morning, Mara was at her usual table, second plate, datapad open, window seat, with a view of the full room. The table had 4 students at it now instead of 2, because several of the Delori from Quiv's dormitory corridor had gradually started joining them in the mornings. And Quiv had started arriving early to make sure there were enough chairs. A new student came through the cafeteria doors. She was a Thessian, young, clearly first week, holding her tray with both hands and scanning the room with wide eyes and the particular expression of someone trying very hard not to look as overwhelmed as they felt. She stood near the entrance for a long moment, not sure where to go. Quiv saw her and raised one hand in the Thessian greeting gesture. She spotted him, and the relief that crossed her face was immediate and visible. She started toward the table. Mara moved her datapad to make room without looking up. The new student sat down, introduced herself in a small voice, and looked around at the table. She noticed Mara, looked at her for a moment with mild curiosity the way everyone did at first, and then turned back to her food. Quiv, who noticed everything, watched Mara for a moment. She was eating, reading, completely settled. The cafeteria noise rose and fell around the table the way it always did. The morning light from the observation panels made long, pale lines across the floor. He had been thinking lately about how to describe Mara Voss to people who had not met her. about what the right starting point was, what detail captured the essential thing. And he had been finding it difficult. Because the essential thing was not a single detail, but a combination of things that did not usually exist together in one creature. She was the most dangerous person on the station. He understood this now completely, and without any doubt. She was also the person who passed you the bread before you asked, who answered every question honestly, who had sat quietly on the floor outside his door once when she thought he might not want to be alone, who had walked into a situation that everyone else in that corridor had decided was not their problem and had resolved it in 4 seconds without raising her voice once. He did not think these things were contradictions. He thought they might, in fact, be the same thing. On a planet where survival was the daily work, where the ground itself was dangerous and the air was combustible and the animals were built to kill, the creatures that had made it through were not the loudest or the most aggressive or the most impressive to look at. They were the ones that were still present when the noise stopped, calm and capable and unhurried and genuinely, deeply unbothered by whatever it was that was trying to scare them. Mara Voss had grown up in that place, had been shaped by it the way stone is shaped by water, slowly and completely, until the shaping was just what she was. She finished her second plate, stacked the empty dishes neatly, and started on her third. Outside the observation panels, the stars moved in their slow, steady arcs, indifferent and very far away. The cafeteria was warm and noisy and full. At the small table near the far wall, things were exactly as they should be.